Thank you. Okay, it was a great evening and a great honor. Normally, I think former presidents shouldn't get honors. I think the job was honor enough. But I love this tonight, just because I got to go down memory lane. I think the recognition that you also gave to Hillary, we are about to celebrate, if I make it until October, our 50th wedding anniversary. And when we started, all of her friends thought she'd made a terrible mistake. And they thought she had gone to the edge of the earth to a place they'd never heard of and wasted her time. But I'm very proud of her, and I think we've had a good life, and we haven't mentioned the fact that the most important part of our marriage is in the life of our daughter, Chelsea, and our grandkids, and my wonderful son-in-law. I want to be brief, but I want to say just a couple of things. First of all, to all of you who've been honored tonight, I thank you. And I ask you all to think about the fact that if you try hard enough to do important things, you will be criticized, doctor, and you will fail from time to time. Nobody succeeds all the time. I still wake up in the middle of the night after all these years, missing Itzhak Rabin and wondering what I could have done to make that peace stick. But here's what I know. I tried. And as you said, you think a lot of what we did was worthwhile. And in the 4 years after I left office, the mortality rate was 3 times what it was in the 8 years that I served and worked for peace and failed. 3 times as, so on an annual basis, it was 6 times the death rate for both Jews and Muslims, for the Palestinians and the Israelis. There's a lesson there. Trying and failing is better than sitting on the sidelines and making no difference. I still think about that. Not a week goes by that I don't miss Nelson Mandela and my friend Seamus Heaney and all the people that I walked along the way with. I love President Havel of Czechoslovakia. He strongly supported the expansion of NATO, and I went back to Prague not very long ago, and I got a saxophone made in Prague by a company that succeeded the company that made me a saxophone when I went there in 1995. And so I now have 2. And Havel joked that you can't foresee sometimes the good things that happen out of difficulty. He said, I'm an anti-communist, but during the Warsaw Pact years, when everything was planned, they assigned the Czech Republic to make all the saxophones for all the military bands. And he said, now I have to make it in the private sector. And so he gave me a saxophone with his logo on it, and he said, "I expect you to play this in public and promote the product." A lot of funny things happen along the way, even when you're failing. So this is what I would like you to think about tonight. First, I loved what you said about the importance of facts and reason and truth. But I think about this all the time. In 2018, Hillary and I went to Hawaii with our family, mostly to be with our grandchildren and our family's friends. But we took a day and visited the telescopes that are on the top of the big island, especially the Keck telescope, which was the biggest of the American coalition there, or whatever you call it. And we got to look into the Andromeda galaxy. And it was fascinating to me. But I thought to myself, here we are on this little tiny speck of dust in a universe that is steadily expanding and already has 1 billion galaxies, not planets. And it's expanding. And I asked the scientists that were there with us when we came out of the telescopes. It was about 18 degrees. It was very cold, and they gave us some coffee and hot chocolate. And I said, "Do you guys have any arguments about and differences of opinion about the likelihood of life on other planets?" He said, "Huge." And I said, "How huge?" He said, "Well, there are those of us who think it's 85% likely and those who think it's 95% likely." And he said, since the universe is 14 billion years old and it's, there's 1 billion galaxies, that's a big number. But it's a small difference. And I thought to myself, what are we doing being small and mean to each other and estimating our massive differences, making us so much more important and making you so much more sleazy? What is the matter with us? We're just passing through. The universe is 14 billion years old. The planet's 4 billion years old. And there's all these things happening that are so big and so small. When the doctor figures out how we can all live to be 150 without young people saying, "You look so good for a man your age." It's that last phrase that I hate. So when you figure that out, most of the venom we spewed over each other will seem like the most insignificant thing. When all of you were recounting what we tried to do in the Balkans, in Northern Ireland, and other places, the thing that meant the most to me, for which I can take no credit, is that you said I treated everybody with respect. And it meant the world to me because that's what I was raised to do. My mother, bless her soul, if she were still alive, if I were president and I talked about people the way some people in political power do today, she would whip me in public for doing it. And I ask you to think about that. One night I was sitting under a massive baobab tree or banyan tree in Sri Lanka at a dinner with all the leading officials, because they'd had the terrible tsunami there, and I'd been working to fix it along with the first President Bush. And I was sitting with this very handsome, gray-haired man who was the leader of the Tamil Tigers, who were the Hindu group that we had on the terrorist list. And they put him with me for dinner. And President Bush sat with the leader of the Buddhist opposition to the president. And we were talking about how we're going to rebuild. And he looked at me and he said, "You know, you never would take me off the terrorist list, but I liked you anyway." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I thought you cared about religious discrimination. I thought you cared about what we were going through. I thought you got it." That's what I wanted people to think about America. We are just passing through. Life is going by. And if we haven't learned anything, all of us here today, it is not only mean, cruel, and sometimes fatal to abuse power. It's foolish. There is so much that we can do, but we have to do it together. A couple of years ago, I lost a good friend of mine named E.O. Wilson at the age of 90, who was probably the most famous ant scientist in the history of America. He was from Alabama. He went to MIT. And he's the first person who taught me through his books, and I later got to know him, that the combined weight of all the ants on Earth exceeds the combined weight of all the people on Earth. That's a nice little factoid, isn't it? So Wilson wrote a book called The Social Conquest of Earth, in which he said, "The thing I have learned is that the four most durable species that have ever lived, based on all the historical evidence, are ants, termites, bees, and people." And he said the interesting thing is that ants, termites, and bees, as far as we know, have no consciousness. They have evolved to be durable through habits of cooperation. People have the greatest advantage and the greatest handicap. They have consciousness and a conscience. The consciousness makes them more arrogant, and the conscience pulls them back from the brink of destruction before it's too late. So we think we're smarter than we are, and we play all these silly games. We're destroying species at the most rapid rate in 10,000 years. Are we prepared to deal with the consequences? No, we just pretend they're not there. And on and on and on. So Wilson said he was betting, even though he'd spent all his years warning people about this, that, or the other thing, he was betting that our conscience would carry us home. So think about that tonight. Think about all these wonderful people who have talked about the lives they lived, all these people that have put their own lives at risk, and how quickly life passes. And think about our little planet. How did we get so lucky? But who else is out there? And where are they? And when will they be found? And meanwhile, shouldn't we do more to cooperate and to define the terms of our interdependence in inclusive, positive terms not in negative, destructive ones. That is what we have to teach people. If we could embrace that one lesson all over the globe and treat each other with greater decency and care, all the rest would be background music, and it would be a very pretty tune. Thank you very much.